Years passed, and the bond between Ethan and Shadow only grew stronger. Though their bodies aged, their connection remained unshaken. Shadow's movements became slower, his once powerful leaps now reduced to careful steps. Ethan, too, felt the weight of time pressing down on him. His hands were often stiff in the mornings, and his legs ached after long walks. Yet neither of them complained. They had already lived more than either could have imagined, and every day together was a gift. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan woke to find Shadow lying quietly by the fireplace. The beast's yellow eyes followed him as he moved around the cabin, but there was a tiredness in them that hadn't been there before. Ethan knelt beside him, running his hand gently over Shadow's scaled side. "You've done so much for me," he whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Shadow let out a soft rumble, leaning into Ethan's touch. It was clear he wasn't in pain, but his energy was fading. Ethan stayed by his side all day, speaking softly about their adventures, the endless desert of Zoreth 7, the battles they had fought, the moments of laughter and peace they had shared. Shadow listened intently, his tail swishing faintly with each memory. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Shadow closed his eyes for the last time. Ethan sat beside him, holding his head in his lap until the warmth left his body. Tears streamed down Ethan's face, but they weren't just tears of sadness. They were also tears of gratitude. Shadow had been more than a companion. He had been a teacher, a protector, and a friend. He had shown Ethan the true meaning of trust and love. In the days that followed, Ethan buried Shadow near the river where they had spent so many afternoons playing. He marked the spot with a simple stone, etching Shadow's name into its surface. Every morning, Ethan visited the grave, sitting quietly and remembering the life they had built together. Though the house felt emptier without Shadow's presence, Ethan carried his spirit with him wherever he went. Ethan continued writing, sharing new stories about their time on Earth. His book had touched countless lives, inspiring people to see the world, and those different from them, with kindness and understanding. Schools began teaching his story, and documentaries were made about his journey. People spoke of Shadow not as a dangerous alien creature, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. As Ethan grew older, he knew his own time was nearing its end, but he faced it without fear. He had lived a full life, one filled with challenges, triumphs, and an unbreakable bond. On his final day, he sat by the fire, surrounded by photos and mementos of Shadow. His heart was at peace, knowing he would soon be reunited with the creature who had changed everything. When Ethan passed away, the world mourned the loss of a man who had taught humanity so much, but his legacy lived on. People visited the remote property, leaving flowers and notes near Shadow's grave. Artists painted murals of Ethan and Shadow standing side by side, their silhouettes framed by twin suns. Parents told their children bedtime stories about the man who survived an alien planet and the beast who became his best friend. Though Ethan and Shadow were gone, their story endured. It reminded everyone who heard it that even in the darkest places, bonds of love and loyalty could shine brightly. And in those moments when life felt overwhelming, people thought of Ethan and Shadow, two unlikely companions who prove that no matter how different we are, we can always find a way to connect. Life in the remote property was quiet but fulfilling. Ethan and Shadow spent their days exploring the dense forests, climbing hills, and wandering along the edges of a nearby river. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of pine trees and damp earth. It was nothing like the harsh desert of Zoreth 7, but Shadow seemed to enjoy it all the same. He chased rabbits through the underbrush, splashed in the shallow parts of the river, and basked in the sunlight that filtered through the trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, both of them were truly free. Ethan worked hard to make the place feel like home. He repaired an old cabin on the property, patching up holes in the walls and reinforcing the roof. Inside, he set up simple furniture, most of it scavenged from nearby towns, and created a cozy corner where he could sit and write. Writing had become important to him. Every evening, by the light of a lantern, Ethan jotted down his thoughts about Zoreth 7, the aliens, and everything he and Shadow had been through. At first it was just for himself, a way to process everything. But over time, he realized his story might mean something to others. Rachel Monroe, the journalist who had helped them escape the facility, encouraged Ethan to share his experiences with the world. "People need to hear this," she told him during one of her visits. "Your story isn't just about survival. It's about trust, friendship, and overcoming fear. It could inspire so many." At first, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if he wanted to relive those memories or invite more attention into their lives. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized Rachel was right. If telling his story could help people understand Shadow and creatures like him, then it was worth it. So, with Rachel's guidance, Ethan began turning his notes into a book. The writing process brought back vivid memories of Zoreth 7. Ethan described the endless black sands, the twin suns, and the strange creatures they had encountered. He wrote about the loneliness he had felt before meeting Shadow and how the bond between them had saved his life. He didn't shy away from the challenges, the hunger, the cold, the constant danger, but he also highlighted the moments of hope and joy. By the time he finished, the manuscript was thick with pages, each one filled with emotion and detail. When the book was published, it became an instant success. Readers were captivated by Ethan's journey and deeply moved by his relationship with Shadow. They sent letters thanking him for sharing his story, many saying it had changed the way they thought about animals and even other people. Some fans traveled to the area, hoping to catch a glimpse of Shadow, but Ethan kept their location private. He didn't want to disrupt the peace they had worked so hard to build. Shadow, for his part, remained unchanged by the fame. He continued living as he always had, hunting, playing, and keeping watch over Ethan. Sometimes, when strangers approached the property, Shadow would let out a low growl, warning them to stay away. Ethan appreciated the protection, knowing Shadow still saw himself as his guardian. As the years passed, Ethan grew older, his hair streaked with gray and his steps slower than before. Shadow aged too, his once shimmering scales dulling slightly and his movements less energetic. But their bond remained as strong as ever. They still explored the forest together, though their adventures were shorter now. And every night, Ethan would sit by the fire, scratching behind Shadow's ears while reflecting on how far they had come. Though Ethan knew their time together was limited, he cherished every moment. Shadow had given him a second chance at life, teaching him lessons about courage, loyalty, and love. And Ethan hoped that through his book, their story would continue to touch hearts long after they were gone. The journey back to Earth was unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. The alien ship was vast and strange, filled with glowing panels, humming machines, and corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Shadow walked beside him, his massive form casting long shadows in the dim light. The aliens kept their distance, watching both of them closely but saying little. Ethan wasn't sure if they were curious or cautious, or perhaps a mix of both. When they finally arrived, Ethan felt a rush of emotions he couldn't quite describe. Part of him was thrilled to be home, to see the familiar blue skies and green fields of Earth after so long on Zoreth 7. But another part of him felt uneasy. He knew life wouldn't go back to normal, not with Shadow by his side. The beast was too large, too alien, to blend into everyday human life. People weren't going to understand their bond. The moment they stepped off the ship, chaos erupted. A group of scientists and soldiers surrounded them, shouting questions and pointing cameras. Bright lights flashed as reporters tried to capture every detail. Shadow growled low in his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the noise and crowds. Ethan placed a hand on the beast's side, speaking softly to calm him. "It's okay," he said. "We're safe now." But safe wasn't the right word. The government quickly took control of the situation, whisking Ethan and Shadow away to a secure facility. Scientists poked and prodded them, running tests to learn more about Shadow's biology and how Ethan had survived on Zoreth 7. They treated Shadow like a specimen, not a living being, and it made Ethan furious. He refused to leave Shadow's side, standing between the creature and anyone who tried to harm him. Public opinion was divided. Some people saw Ethan as a hero, a man who had faced unimaginable challenges and returned stronger because of Shadow. Others viewed Shadow as a threat, a dangerous alien creature that didn't belong on Earth. Protests broke out, with groups demanding Shadow be studied further or even destroyed. Ethan fought back, giving interviews and telling his story to anyone who would listen. He explained how Shadow had saved his life, how they had relied on each other to survive. Slowly, some people began to see Shadow not as a monster, but as a loyal companion. Despite the growing support, life in the facility was suffocating. Ethan missed the freedom of the desert, the quiet moments he and Shadow had shared under the twin suns. Shadow seemed to feel the same way, pacing restlessly and letting out low rumbles whenever strangers came too close. Ethan knew they couldn't stay there forever. One day, a journalist named Rachel Monroe visited the facility. She was kind and patient, listening carefully as Ethan told her everything. About Zoreth 7, about the aliens, about Shadow. Unlike the others, she didn't treat Shadow like a curiosity or a danger. She saw him for what he truly was, a remarkable creature who had formed an unbreakable bond with a human. Rachel promised to help them. With Rachel's assistance, Ethan managed to negotiate a deal. He agreed to allow limited studies of Shadow in exchange for their release. The government reluctantly agreed, and Ethan and Shadow were relocated to a remote property far from the public eye. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a sense of peace. At the new location, Shadow adapted slowly. He explored the forests and rivers, chasing deer through the trees and splashing in the water. Ethan built a sturdy shelter for them both, using materials he found nearby. Together, they settled into a routine, finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. Though the scars of Zoreth 7 would always remain, Ethan knew they had each other, and that was all that mattered. The aliens wasted no time in beginning their test. They led Ethan and Shadow to a wide, circular arena carved into the desert floor. The ground was smooth and metallic, glowing faintly under the twin suns. Around the edges of the arena stood tall structures that hummed with energy, casting an eerie blue light over everything. Ethan felt uneasy, his heart pounding as he glanced at Shadow. The beast's muscles were tense, his yellow eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. "This is your trial," one of the aliens said telepathically, its voice cold and sharp. "You must prove your bond. If you fail, neither of you will leave this planet." Ethan nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. He didn't know what the test would involve, but he was ready to face it, for Shadow's sake. Shadow let out a low rumble, pressing closer to Ethan as if offering reassurance. Together, they stepped into the center of the arena. The first challenge came without warning. The ground beneath them began to shift, splitting apart to reveal narrow platforms suspended over a deep chasm. The platforms moved unpredictably, sliding and rotating in random patterns. One wrong step would send them plummeting into the darkness below. "You must cross together," the alien instructed. "Your connection will guide you." Ethan took a deep breath, focusing on the task ahead. He turned to Shadow, speaking softly. "Stay close to me, okay? We'll do this together." Shadow tilted his head, then gave a small nod, as if understanding. The first few steps were nerve-wracking. Ethan moved carefully, testing each platform before putting his full weight on it. Shadow followed closely, his massive body surprisingly agile despite its size. When a platform shifted suddenly, Ethan stumbled, nearly losing his balance. But Shadow was there, steadying him with a gentle nudge from his snout. As they neared the middle of the arena, the second challenge appeared. Strange creatures emerged from the shadows. Fast, insect-like beings with razor-sharp claws. They swarmed toward Ethan and Shadow, their movements erratic and aggressive. Ethan grabbed a sharp rock from his pocket, holding it tightly as he prepared to defend himself. But Shadow acted first, roaring loudly and charging at the attackers. His powerful claws slashed through the air, driving the creatures back. Ethan joined the fight, using his makeshift weapon to fend off any beasts that got too close. Their teamwork was seamless, each movement flowing naturally from the other. Shadow protected Ethan's blind spots, while Ethan focused on the smaller threats that slipped past the beast. Within minutes, the creatures retreated, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as they had come. The final challenge was the most daunting. A wall of fire erupted around the arena, trapping them inside. The heat was intense, making it hard to breathe. In the center of the flames stood a single door, a way out, but it was guarded by a towering mechanical construct. The machine's red eyes glowed menacingly as it advanced toward them, its metallic limbs whirring with precision. Ethan clenched his fists, determination replacing fear. "We've come this far," he said to Shadow. "Let's finish this." Shadow roared in agreement, stepping forward to meet the machine head-on. The battle was fierce. Shadow dodged the construct's attacks, striking back with his claws and teeth. Meanwhile, Ethan searched for a weakness, spotting a glowing panel on the machine's chest. Grabbing a piece of debris, he hurled it at the panel, causing sparks to fly. The machine faltered, giving Shadow the opening he needed to deliver a final blow. When the construct collapsed, the flames died down, revealing the aliens watching silently from the sidelines. One of them stepped forward. "You have proven your bond," it said. "Both of you may leave." Relief washed over Ethan as he turned to Shadow. The beast let out a triumphant growl, his tail swishing proudly. Together, they walked toward the ship, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together. One morning, as Ethan and Shadow explored the edges of the canyon, something unusual caught Ethan's eye. High above the horizon, a faint glimmer of metal reflected the light of the twin suns. At first, he thought it might be another trick of the desert, a mirage or a trick of the light. But as he squinted, he realized it was moving steadily across the sky. It wasn't a natural object. It was a ship. Ethan's heart raced. Could it be the aliens returning? Was this his chance to leave Zoreth 7 and go back home? He grabbed Shadow's scaled side, pulling him close as if to steady himself. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing toward the sky. Shadow tilted his head, his yellow eyes following Ethan's gesture. The beast let out a low growl, his body tensing as if sensing danger. Ethan knew he had to act quickly. This could be his only opportunity to escape the planet, but he also knew he couldn't leave Shadow behind. The thought of parting ways with the creature who had saved his life countless times felt unbearable. Shadow wasn't just a companion, he was family. Leaving him would mean betraying everything they had built together. As the ship grew closer, Ethan began gathering supplies. He packed the few tools he had scavenged, along with scraps of food and water. Then he led Shadow toward the open desert, positioning themselves in a clearing where the ship might land. But as they approached the site, Shadow hesitated. The beast planted his feet firmly in the sand, refusing to move any farther. His growls grew louder, more agitated, and his eyes darted nervously around the area. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, kneeling beside Shadow. He placed a hand on the beast's side, trying to calm him. Shadow responded by nudging Ethan gently, almost pushing him away. It was clear the creature didn't want to go near the landing zone. Ethan frowned, torn between his desire to signal the ship and his loyalty to Shadow. He couldn't abandon the beast, but he also couldn't ignore the chance to return home. When the ship finally descended, kicking up clouds of black sand, Ethan shielded his face from the wind. The vessel was sleek and metallic, unmistakably alien. A hatch opened, and several figures emerged, tall, insect-like beings with glowing eyes. They scanned the area, their movements deliberate and precise. When they spotted Ethan, they paused, tilting their heads as if studying him. "You are alive. one of them said telepathically, its voice echoing in Ethan's mind. "We did not expect this." Ethan stepped forward cautiously, keeping one hand raised in a gesture of peace. "I survived because of him," he replied, gesturing toward Shadow, who remained at the edge of the clearing. The aliens turned their attention to the massive beast, their expressions unreadable. "He is dangerous," another alien said. "You must leave him here." Ethan shook his head firmly. "No, I won't leave without him. Shadow saved my life. He's the reason I'm still alive." The aliens exchanged silent looks, communicating in ways Ethan couldn't understand. After a long pause, one of them spoke again. "If you wish to return, you must prove your bond. We will test both of you." Ethan swallowed hard, glancing back at Shadow. The beast met his gaze, his yellow eyes steady and unwavering. Whatever the aliens had planned, Ethan knew they would face it together. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "Fine. Test us." The aliens moved closer, surrounding Ethan and Shadow. Their presence was intimidating, but Ethan refused to show fear. Shadow growled softly, staying close to Ethan's side. For now, all they could do was wait and see what the aliens had in store. Whatever happened next, Ethan was determined not to let Shadow down. Months passed, and Ethan and Shadow became inseparable. They had learned to read each other's movements, anticipating needs and reacting instinctively. The harsh desert of Zoreth 7 no longer felt quite as unforgiving with Shadow by his side. Ethan's confidence grew, and he began to feel like they could face anything together. But the planet still held surprises, some good, some dangerous. One day, while searching for water, Ethan noticed something strange on the horizon. It was faint at first, a shimmering line that seemed out of place against the endless black sand. As they approached, he realized it wasn't just a mirage. It was a narrow canyon, its walls jagged and steep. At the bottom, there was a trickle of water flowing through the rocks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sustain them if they stayed close. Ethan decided to make the canyon their temporary home. The towering walls provided shade from the twin suns, and the steady flow of water meant they wouldn't have to wander far to refill their supplies. For the first time since arriving on Zoreth 7, Ethan felt a sense of stability. He started marking the days in the soft sand with a stick, keeping track of how long they had been there. Each passing day felt like a small victory. But the canyon also brought new dangers. Predatory creatures lurked in the shadows, drawn by the promise of water. One night, as Ethan slept near the stream, he was jolted awake by the sound of growling. Opening his eyes, he saw a pack of spiny-backed beasts circling him, their glowing eyes fixed on him hungrily. Before he could react, Shadow leaped between him and the predators, his massive body blocking their path. The fight that followed was intense. Shadow roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls, as he charged at the nearest attacker. Claws slashed through the air, and teeth snapped dangerously close to his scaled hide. Ethan scrambled to his feet, grabbing a sharp rock to defend himself if needed, but Shadow didn't give the predators a chance to get past him. With precision and power, he drove them back one by one until they retreated into the darkness. When the threat was gone, Ethan rushed to Shadow's side. The beast had several deep scratches along his flank, oozing dark liquid onto the sand. Ethan's heart sank as he examined the wounds. "You saved me," he whispered, running his hand over Shadow's scales. The creature let out a low rumble. Leaning into the touch, Ethan knew he had to act quickly. Using strips of cloth torn from his shirt, he cleaned the cuts as best he could and pressed the fabric against them to stop the bleeding. Over the next few days, Ethan kept a close watch on Shadow, making sure the wounds didn't become infected. He boiled water over a small fire to sterilize the cloth and changed the makeshift bandages regularly. Shadow endured it all patiently, his yellow eyes never leaving Ethan's face. Slowly, the injuries began to heal, leaving faint scars behind. The incident only strengthened their bond. Ethan realized how much Shadow risked for him, and Shadow seemed to trust Ethan even more after being cared for. Together, they continued to adapt to life in the canyon, finding ways to thrive despite the challenges. As weeks turned into months, Ethan noticed subtle changes in Shadow's behavior. The beast had always been protective, but now he seemed almost playful at times. He would nudge Ethan gently with his snout or toss small rocks around with his claws, as if inviting him to join in. Ethan laughed, tossing the rocks back and scratching behind Shadow's ears. These moments of lightness were rare but precious, a reminder that survival wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was also about finding joy in the smallest things. Though Ethan still dreamed of returning to Earth, he couldn't imagine leaving Shadow behind. The thought of separation filled him with dread. Shadow wasn't just a pet or a tool for survival. He was family. And as long as they were together, Ethan believed they could overcome anything, even the alien world that had tried so hard to break them. Ethan and Shadow's bond grew stronger with each passing day. At first, their relationship was cautious, built on small gestures of trust. But as time went on, it became clear that they relied on each other in ways neither could have imagined. Shadow wasn't just a companion. He was a partner in survival. His sharp senses and powerful body made him an invaluable ally in the dangerous world of Zoreth 7. One of the biggest challenges Ethan faced was finding food. The planet offered little in terms of edible plants, and hunting was nearly impossible without tools or weapons. Shadow changed all of that. The massive beast had no trouble tracking down prey, using its keen sense of smell to locate animals hiding beneath the sand or in the rocky outcrops. Once it found something, Shadow would either chase it down himself or corner it for Ethan to finish off with a sharp rock. It was a brutal but effective system, and it kept them both fed. Ethan quickly learned to adapt to Shadow's hunting style. He stayed close during the hunts, watching how the creature moved and anticipating its next steps. Sometimes, Shadow would let Ethan take the lead, allowing him to use his human ingenuity to set traps or create distractions. Other times, Shadow would handle everything himself, bringing down large prey with ease before dragging it back to share. Ethan always made sure to thank Shadow after a successful hunt, patting his scaled side or speaking softly to him. Though Shadow couldn't understand his words, Ethan liked to think the beast appreciated the effort. But survival wasn't just about food. The harsh environment of Zoreth 7 demanded constant innovation. During the freezing nights, Ethan struggled to stay warm. The thin air and biting winds sapped his strength, leaving him shivering and exhausted by morning. Shadow noticed this and began curling up beside him at night, his massive body acting as a shield against the cold. Ethan would press himself against Shadow's warm scales, grateful for the comfort. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep him alive. The days were equally challenging. The twin suns burned relentlessly, turning the black sand into a scorching surface that blistered Ethan's skin. Shadow seemed unaffected by the heat, moving effortlessly across the desert. Ethan tried to mimic his companion, staying in Shadow's shadow whenever possible and covering his exposed skin with scraps of cloth he found. Together, they navigated the endless dunes, searching for water and shelter. Their teamwork extended beyond physical survival. Ethan often felt overwhelmed by the isolation of Zoreth 7, the weight of being so far from home pressing down on him. On those days, Shadow's presence was a source of comfort. The beast had a calming effect, his steady movements and watchful eyes reminding Ethan that he wasn't alone. In return, Ethan did his best to care for Shadow. He made sure the creature always had access to water, sharing every drop he found. He also tended to Shadow's injuries when the beast got into fights with other predators, cleaning wounds with damp cloths and keeping an eye on them until they healed. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Ethan began to see Shadow not just as a pet or even a partner, but as a friend. He talked to the beast constantly, sharing stories about Earth and his life before Zoreth 7. Shadow listened patiently, his yellow eyes following Ethan as he spoke. Sometimes, Ethan swore he saw understanding in those eyes, as if Shadow knew exactly what he was saying. Their connection became a lifeline for both of them. For Ethan, Shadow represented hope, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, companionship and trust could thrive. For Shadow, Ethan was a curiosity, a fragile yet determined creature who refused to give up. Together, they proved that survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about leaning on each other when the odds seemed impossible. And though Ethan still dreamed of escape, he knew one thing for certain. Wherever his journey took him next, Shadow would be by his side. The days that followed were a blur of survival and fear. Ethan walked endlessly, searching for water and shelter, while avoiding the strange creatures that roamed the desert. The memory of the massive scaled beast stayed with him, haunting his thoughts. He couldn't shake the image of its glowing yellow eyes or the way it had growled at him before walking away. It had spared his life, but why? Was it curiosity, or was it simply not hungry at the time? Ethan didn't know, and he wasn't eager to find out. Despite the danger, Ethan began noticing something odd. The giant creature seemed to be following him. At first, it was just a shadow in the distance, moving silently across the black sands. Then, it started appearing closer, always at the edge of his vision, always watching. Ethan's instincts told him to be afraid, but there was something about the way the beast behaved that made him hesitate. It never attacked. It never even came too close. Instead, it lingered, as if guarding him from afar. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Ethan decided to test the creature's intentions. He stopped walking and turned to face the direction where the beast usually appeared. Sure enough, after a few moments, he saw the faint glimmer of its scales reflecting the dim light of the stars. Taking a deep breath, Ethan did something bold. He sat down on the sand and waited. The beast emerged slowly, its massive form casting a long shadow in the moonlight. It stopped a safe distance away, watching him with those piercing yellow eyes. Ethan didn't move. He kept his hands visible and spoke softly, even though he doubted the creature could understand him. "I'm not your enemy," he said. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart was racing. The beast tilted its head slightly, studying him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without warning, the creature turned and disappeared into the night. Ethan wasn't sure what to make of the encounter, but he felt a small sense of relief. The beast hadn't attacked, and that gave him hope. Over the next few days, he started leaving small offerings behind. Scraps of food he found during his searches, bits of dry plants, anything he thought the creature might like. He didn't know if it would eat them, but he wanted to show he meant no harm. His efforts paid off. One morning, as Ethan woke up, he noticed the scraps were gone. Encouraged, he continued leaving food, and each time, it vanished by the next day. Slowly, the beast grew bolder. It began coming closer, staying longer, until one evening, it approached him directly. Ethan held his ground, his pulse pounding in his ears. The creature stopped just a few feet away, its yellow eyes locking onto his. Tentatively, Ethan reached out his hand, palm open and empty. For a long moment, the beast didn't move. Then, with deliberate slowness, it lowered its head and sniffed his hand. Its nose was warm and rough, and Ethan resisted the urge to pull away. Finally, the creature let out a low rumble, a sound that was almost comforting, and stepped back. Ethan exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. He smiled faintly, feeling a strange sense of connection. From that day on, the beast stayed near him. It didn't follow him everywhere, but it was always close enough to keep an eye on him. Ethan started calling it Shadow, both because of its dark, shimmering scales and the way it seemed to blend into the landscape. Shadow became his companion, his protector, and in some ways, his only friend on this alien world. Having Shadow around changed everything. The loneliness that had weighed so heavily on Ethan began to lift. He no longer felt completely alone in this harsh, unforgiving place. With Shadow watching over him, he felt safer, braver. Together, they faced the challenges of Zoreth 7, forming a bond that neither of them could have anticipated. And though Ethan still dreamed of returning home, he knew one thing for certain. Wherever he went, Shadow would go with him. Ethan reached the jagged rock formation just as his strength was about to give out. The shade it provided was a small mercy, but it felt like heaven compared to the relentless heat of the twin suns. He collapsed against the cool stone, breathing heavily. His canteen was nearly empty, and he sipped sparingly, knowing he couldn't afford to waste even a drop. As he rested, Ethan's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? How could he survive on this desolate planet? The landscape around him offered no answers. The black sand stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by occasional clusters of rocks or strange, twisted plants that looked more like sculptures than living things. There were no signs of water, no animals, nothing that hinted at life. Just emptiness. Ethan tried to push away the growing fear inside him. He reminded himself that panicking wouldn't help. Survival meant staying calm and thinking clearly. As the hours passed, Ethan began to notice subtle changes in the environment. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't long before he realized the sound wasn't harmless. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and then he saw them, creatures emerging from beneath the sand. They were small, no bigger than dogs, but their bodies were covered in spiny armor, and their mouths were filled with razor-sharp teeth. They moved quickly, darting across the surface like insects. Ethan froze, unsure what to do. The creatures circled him cautiously, their glowing eyes fixed on him. He grabbed a sharp rock from the ground, holding it tightly in case they attacked. But instead of lunging at him, the creatures hesitated, sniffing the air. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they scurried away, disappearing back into the sand. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his heart still pounding. He didn't know why they had left, but he wasn't about to question his luck. Night fell quickly, and with it came a new set of challenges. The temperature dropped sharply, turning the warm desert into a freezing wasteland. Ethan huddled closer to the rocks, trying to shield himself from the biting wind. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made him jump, expecting another attack. He spent the night scanning the darkness, clutching his makeshift weapon, while thoughts of home kept creeping into his mind. He thought about his cabin, his fields, the simple life he had taken for granted. Would he ever see any of it again? By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he knew he couldn't stay in one place. Staying put meant certain death. Gathering his resolve, Ethan stood and began walking again. This time, he paid closer attention to his surroundings, searching for anything that might help him survive. After several hours, he stumbled upon something unexpected. A shallow pool of water nestled between two large boulders. It wasn't much, but it was enough to refill his canteen and quench his thirst. For the first time since arriving on Zoreth 7, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. But the planet wasn't done testing him. As he knelt by the pool, drinking greedily, he heard a low growl behind him. Slowly, he turned his head and saw it, a massive creature unlike anything he'd encountered before. It was enormous, easily twice his height, with shimmering scales that reflected the light of the twin suns. Its body was muscular and powerful, and its eyes glowed a fierce yellow. Long claws extended from its front paws, and its mouth was lined with rows of sharp teeth. Ethan's blood ran cold. This was no ordinary predator. It was a beast built for killing. For a moment, neither of them moved. The creature stared at Ethan, its growl rumbling like distant thunder. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he knew he wouldn't get far. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, meeting the creature's gaze. To his surprise, the beast didn't attack. After what felt like an eternity, it let out a final growl and turned away, disappearing into the distance. Ethan exhaled, realizing he was trembling. He didn't understand why the creature had spared him. But he wasn't about to question it. Gathering his things, he continued his journey, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. The beast was gone, but its presence lingered in his mind. Little did Ethan know, their paths would cross again. And when they did, it would change everything. Ethan Carter lived a quiet life in rural Ohio. He was not famous or rich, but he was happy. Every evening, after finishing work on his small farm, Ethan liked to sit outside his cabin and look at the stars. The night sky always made him feel peaceful. It was as if the universe held secrets just waiting to be discovered. Little did Ethan know, those secrets were about to find him. One clear night, as Ethan sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, he noticed something unusual in the sky. At first, it looked like a falling star, but it moved too slowly. Then it grew brighter and larger, heading straight toward him. Before Ethan could react, a blinding light enveloped him. The force was so strong that it lifted him off the ground. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. Everything went white. And then, darkness. When Ethan woke up, he was no longer on Earth. He lay on a cold, metallic floor, surrounded by strange shapes and glowing lights. As his eyes adjusted, he realized he wasn't alone. Towering over him were creatures unlike anything he had ever seen. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with long, slender limbs and exoskeletons that shimmered like polished glass. Their heads were elongated, and their large, multifaceted eyes glowed faintly. But what scared Ethan most was how they communicated, not with words, but with thoughts that entered his mind directly. "You are here for a purpose," one of the creatures said telepathically. Its voice was calm but firm, echoing inside Ethan's head. "We have chosen you to test your species' resilience." Ethan blinked, trying to process what was happening. "Chosen me? For what?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling. The creature tilted its head slightly, as though studying him. "You will be placed on Zorath 7, a planet where survival is challenging. If you live, we will learn much about humanity. If you die..." The thought trailed off, unfinished, but the meaning was clear. Before Ethan could protest, the aliens led him to a circular platform. A humming sound filled the air, and suddenly, he felt weightless again. When the sensation stopped, he found himself standing on an alien world. The ground beneath his feet was covered in black sand, stretching endlessly in every direction. 2 suns hung low in the sky, casting harsh, orange light across the barren landscape. The air smelled strange, metallic, and tasted bitter when he breathed it in. Panic began to rise in Ethan's chest. He turned around, hoping to see some sign of escape, but there was nothing. No buildings, no ships, no way back. Just emptiness. His heart pounded as he took stock of his situation. He wore only the clothes he had on back home: jeans, a flannel shirt, and boots. In his pocket, he found a small canteen of water, which he quickly realized wouldn't last long. As the reality of his predicament sank in, Ethan dropped to his knees. "Why me?" he whispered to the empty horizon. There was no answer, only the eerie silence of the alien desert. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he forced himself to stand. Crying wouldn't help him survive. Taking a deep breath, Ethan started walking. He didn't know where he was going, but staying in one place felt worse than moving. Step by step, he trudged through the black sand, scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter or water. Hours passed, and the relentless heat from the twin suns sapped his strength. His throat burned, and his legs felt like lead, but he refused to give up. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Ethan spotted something in the distance, a jagged rock formation jutting out of the sand. Maybe it offered shade, or perhaps even a cave. Summoning the last of his energy, he pushed forward, determined to reach it. For now, survival was all that mattered.